Welcome everyone to the Score Fantasy Football Podcast presented by Subway. I'm your host Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at the Score, and I am joined today by my co-host David P. Woods. And on today's episode, we decided to end the season where we began with the very first guest we had. It's Mike Tagliere of FantasyPros, one of the best in the business. We're going to talk to Tags about the player matchups that could be pretty intriguing and maybe have a big impact on the Super Bowl. We're also going to get his prediction on the big game. And then we're going to run through the top free agents that are going to be on the market in March. And we're going to be looking at it from a fantasy perspective, obviously. So focusing on the offensive skill positions, trying to figure out who could be the risers and fallers depending where they sign in free agency. But first, Woods, let's take a look at a couple standout performances from last week and their impact moving forward in our Mighty Moments segment, which is presented by our friends at Subway, whose new Mighty Melts deliver great taste for only $4. And there was only one game last week, and it was the Pro Bowl. So that's where we're going to shine our light for this one. Woods, I'm actually going to let you go first this week. So who gets your Mighty Moment?
All right, how's this for a mighty performance? 1 carry for 0 yards, 1 catch for 10 yards. My guy is Melvin Gordon, who for some reason played in the Pro Bowl. Just a couple weeks after struggling through 2 different knee injuries against the Patriots in the playoffs. So, you know what? If we wanted to project going forward from the Pro Bowl, here's something to look at. Melvin Gordon, his knee injuries must not be that serious because he was out on that field in Orlando. He didn't do a whole lot statistically, but I think that's good news entering the offseason. Surely he must be somewhat healthy or confident that his knees are going to be back to full health soon. So I think you slot him right back in as a RB1 if you were drafting today. You'd feel comfortable. Yeah, this guy's knees must be fine.
I like that one. I mean, normally we always go on big stats and big plays and everything, but you know I'm a huge Melvin Gordon guy, so it was great to see him be out there. Luckily, he didn't get hurt in that game. I'm actually going to go with Gordon's teammate, and there wasn't much to take away from the Pro Bowl, we should say. I mean, the NFC only scored 1 touchdown. Wasn't many guys on the AFC side that lit it up either, but Keenan Allen led all receivers, had 4 catches, 95 yards, including a 50-yarder. He was a top 15 fantasy receiver this year in all formats. You know, might have been a little disappointing to some. I think a lot of people, myself included, saw him as a clear-cut wide receiver 1, and he didn't really get to that level. But, you know, I definitely thought he would crack the top 10, but we saw, you know, Mike Williams come on a little bit there. Obviously, Tyrell Williams was there. He's potentially leaving in free agency, so we could see Allen's targets get a bit of a bump next season, and we're going to get to Tyrell Williams in a bit when we talk about free agency, but let's bring on today's guest first. Like I said, Mike Tagliere. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Tagliere NFL, and you can find all his content over at FantasyPros. And full disclosure, Tags, I'm going to say this. I messaged you. You got my message. You had just landed in the airport from vacation, and you were still willing to respond right away and sign up to do the podcast this week. So I know it, especially for you, it's got to be tough this week. You just got back from vacation, and now you guys are having brutal weather around Chicago there. How you holding up?
Yeah, no, it's a crazy day here. I think we hit a record low. It was like 52 below with the wind chill or something like that. I didn't go outside at all. So unfortunately, I'm holed up in my basement here just working on the NFL draft stuff and taking a glimpse at the Super Bowl. But the Super Bowl is like a game where I just sit back and I try to enjoy it as like a fan, where I don't do any writing on the game or anything like that. I might play a little bit of DFS, but some prop bets, stuff like that. But overall, we can't complain about our jobs, right? I'm in my basement right now, and it's like 75 degrees, and it's negative 52 outside. So I consider myself pretty lucky.
Well, I hope you are willing to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl here. I said, don't normally do a lot of writing about it, but before we get into the free agency preview, I want to start by talking a little bit about the Super Bowl matchups. Last week, we went over a ton of different prop bets. You can go back and you can listen to that episode if you want. This week, though, let's look at some of the interesting player matchups for the game. And we're talking about a couple teams with a lot of stars on both sides of the field. So, Tags, we'll let you go first here. Which matchup do you find most intriguing going into Sunday's game?
So for me, I mean, the Patriots are going to do what they're going to do. It's just like they'll find a way to game plan against that defense. It's not really that hard when you consider the linebackers and the lack of talent that the Rams have. But the most interesting thing to me would be Brandon Cooks and how the Patriots are going to defend him. Obviously, they know him extremely well. I don't think they're going to trust Stephon Gilmore on him one-on-one, but they've been doing that and it's worked for the most part. But if you literally trust him one-on-one with Brandon Cooks, he could beat you down the field. But that's the matchup I'm watching, just because like ever since J.C. Jackson came into the starting lineup for Jonathan Jones, the Patriots have been a much better defense. They obviously did a great job, containing Tyreek Hill last week, but that was also the second time they were playing him, so they had a better chance to, game plan against him. So that's the one I'm most intrigued with. And if the Patriots can keep Brandon Cooks in check, I feel like it almost should be a non-contest, because the Rams are a very concentrated offense, and if you take away some of their top-tier options, they're going to have trouble scoring.
Brandon Cooks' revenge game. Absolutely. Woods, who you got?
I talked a bit about this last week. I'm really interested in just seeing how the Patriots running backs are used in this game. I think against those Rams linebackers who are a little undersized, and the safeties I don't think are all world or anything, I think sort of passing to the running backs could be effective. And I think you want to sort of pound Sony Michel in there. I mean, the way that you sort of neutralize a penetrating defensive tackle like the Rams have a couple of is sometimes just running right at them. So I think we could see some of that too. And obviously the other storyline that everyone's going to be interested in is just seeing how Todd Gurley is used. I mean, he didn't suddenly get bad. I can't let myself believe that. So I think we're going to see him early in the game as the Rams sort of try to establish, is the old Todd Gurley here today, or do we have to move away from him sort of like they did in the playoffs? And I could see the Patriots really try to sort of stuff him early in the game, because if you want to neutralize him, I mean, make him go for a loss his first couple carries, and maybe we don't see him for the rest of the night.
And that's where I'm shining the light as well, looking at Gurley and that Rams rushing attack. I mean, we know the Rams love working out of 11 personnel. 82.8% of their rushing attempts came out of that formation in 2018. And the Patriots were 18th in yards per carry allowed to 11 personnel, and they gave up over 5 yards per rush. So we've seen the Rams lean on the run so much down the stretch. Now we're going to see Gurley after 2 weeks off here, right? Hopefully that means we're finally going to get a healthy version of Gurley. I know he kind of keeps saying that he's been healthy, wasn't on the injury report there, but you have to think after 2 weeks, unless there's something a lot more serious wrong here, Woods, I think you and I have talked about that. Like if we're going to find out after the season that there was something, worse going on here that we don't know about yet. But I think that we're going to see a healthier version of Gurley. And we can't forget that C.J. Anderson's in the mix, and I keep picturing C.J. Anderson just being this very unlikely Super Bowl MVP. I don't want to see that happen. I would like to see the Rams win the game, but I think this matchup is going to favor the Rams, whether it is Gurley or Anderson there. At Tags, Woods and I gave our predictions for the game last week. I said 38-34 Rams, went with a high-scoring one. Woods, what was yours again?
I can't. You're putting me on the spot here. I want to say 27-24.
I think something like that.
Yeah, I think so for the Patriots. Yeah.
So Tags, moment of truth here. What's your prediction and score for the game?
Wow, Woods, you and I are in step, man. I have 27-24 Patriots as well. And by the way, did you guys hear about the prop bet of the Todd Gurley over and under on rushing attempts?
No.
12.5. Give me the over all day.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wish we didn't. I don't know if we saw that one last week. That would have been a good one to ask our gambling guy, Alex Kolodziej, about. As exciting as the Super Bowl is, obviously, it also means that we're at the end of the football season, which is sad. And, over the last month, for us, we've done episodes previewing the top prospects for the draft, going over players with serious injuries and what their recovery timelines are. And now I want to look at the top free agents and looking at it for fantasy at least. So we're not going to talk about every free agent on the market, but this week I have a few posts going up around free agency, players who could see their value increase, those who are destined to disappoint. Woods, I know you're going to be teaming up with the Scores Dan Wilkins. You guys are going to have a look at the top 25 free agents on the market next week. That's going to include defensive players as well. So all around there. For today, let's go position by position here, though, and look at the skill guys, because obviously that's what most fantasy owners are interested in. And I want you guys to chime in and just let me know your thoughts, your fantasy outlooks for these players heading into free agency. And a lot is going to depend on where they land. Of course, that's why this is just a preview, right? We're going to talk about who's going to be out there, get fantasy owners familiar with those names who could be changing teams in March and what that could mean for fantasy. So I'll start off here at quarterback. Not too much to get excited about from a fantasy perspective here, but the two guys I want to bring up are Tyrod Taylor and Teddy Bridgewater. We've seen Taylor put up QB1 numbers in the past, going back to his days with the Bills. There's an outside chance he could get a starting job and maybe get back to that level if he lands with the right team. We know there's a few teams out there that are going to be looking for starting quarterbacks. It's also possible, though, he could end up as a backup somewhere. And for Bridgewater, his career got derailed by that horrific leg injury. He's still young, though. Could be an option for a team in need of a real-life quarterback. I'm not so sure with the depth at fantasy quarterback. I'm not so sure Teddy's going to be able to crack that mix, maybe as a streamer with, how deep the position is. But Tags, do you see either of those guys having a chance to be fantasy relevant in 2019?
I don't think Teddy Bridgewater is going to be. I think the fact that he was on a one-year deal when he went to the Saints, and that the fact that they didn't extend him kind of says a lot, because they need a franchise quarterback to back up Drew Brees. And I thought that we would see an extension to Teddy Bridgewater, and the fact that they haven't, it might kind of tell you a lot, because it just might mean that Teddy Bridgewater didn't sell them on what they saw in practice, what they saw in Week 17. So I think that he's going to have to accept a backup job somewhere and wait for an injury to kind of happen. Whereas Tyrod Taylor, I think he should be a starter in the NFL. I believe that he's a good quarterback for someone like the Jaguars. They're expected to move on from Blake Bortles, releasing him from that contract, and they're kind of left with nothing. So they do have the 7th pick in the draft. I believe that Dwayne Haskins will be off the board by the time that they pick. So, I mean, if they don't feel comfortable about the options, behind him in the draft or whatever the case, they have to get a quarterback somehow, some way. Tyrod, the reason I like him, or in my mock that I'll be releasing, I think this weekend it's going to come out, is like Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. Smaller quarterback, but he's very mobile. And that's what I like about Tyrod Taylor of the Jacksonville Jags. He's not a guy that turns the ball over very much. He can buy some time behind a shoddy offensive line. It actually does wonders, I should say, for Leonard Fournette, because when you get a mobile quarterback back there, typically teams have to keep a spy on the quarterback, which essentially takes a man out of the box for your running back. And Leonard Fournette continually sees 8-man fronts. So I think Tyrod Taylor to Jacksonville makes sense. That team has a defense that could win Super Bowls. And if the offense is competent, I believe that team can go a long way. So Tyrod Taylor to the Jags makes tons of sense. And I know some people are saying Nick Foles should go there. I don't think that's a fit at all. I don't think the offensive line would suit someone like Nick Foles. They don't have the receivers that he would need. So I'm going to say the Tyrod Taylor to the Jags, and it would make tons of sense for fantasy football as well.
I looked over this list and I can't see any fantasy value really. It's because I just don't think that any of these guys are really going to start next year. I've never been a Tyrod guy. I think I'll be pretty surprised if he's starting in week 1. I would say the same thing for Teddy Bridgewater. And then honestly, if you're looking for a free agent quarterback who's maybe likely to be starting in week 1, you might look at like Joe Flacco, who's not a free agent yet, but we know he's going to be available. Maybe he'll be traded, but and then beyond that, I think we're just going to see, more of a philosophical shift towards starting rookies. That there aren't that many teams that need a quarterback this offseason, certainly compared to recent years. The ones that are obvious, like the Giants could get a quarterback. Maybe they'll stick with Eli Manning. The Jaguars got to do something. And then you can sort of identify a few other teams, the Broncos. But as we saw this year and as we've seen in previous years, there's no good reason to keep your rookie off the field. It was dumb that Baker Mayfield didn't start right out of the gate. Like Josh Allen should have been starting right out of the gate. Why are these teams wasting time with, the Tyrod Taylors and starting them to give their rookie quarterback a little more time to develop on the bench? I think someone like Haskins, if he's drafted, maybe he sits behind an Eli Manning for a year, but if I'm the Jaguars and I'm taking him, I'm just putting him on the field. Learn on the field. And I think we'll see the same with some of these other rookie quarterbacks. I mean, they're not that enticing of a crop in general, but I wouldn't waste my time if I was a coach or GM and had a rookie on my roster. I'd just get him on the field, which means that trying to find fantasy value in this crop of free agents, Taylor, Bridgewater, Fitzpatrick, I just don't see very much.
I agree with Tags that I think what he's describing with Taylor and the Jags is a lot of, help Tyrod get success with the Bills, right? That strong running game, and he could take those shot plays and gain a lot of yards on the ground. I agree with you, Woods, in the sense that Tyrod might not be a great quarterback, but from a fantasy perspective, I think he could still be capable if he gets a starting job in the right offense. And I do agree that I think the Jags would be a good spot for him. I think we could see him have some fantasy value there. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with guys like Nick Foles and Flacco, who could be traded, could end up on the free agent market. We'll see there. And, the only other name there, on the list that I'm looking at is, Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I think at this point we know that Fitzpatrick is someone who can come in, start for a couple games, maybe be a spot starter in fantasy, but his days of being trusted as a starter, if he was ever trusted as a starter, are long over there. Let's shift over to running back. There actually is some potential impact players here. Le'Veon Bell is going to generate a lot of headlines, obviously. I have my concerns about him, though. After taking a year off, he's finally probably going to get paid here. What could that mean for his motivation? In general, is he going to be able to replicate the success he had in Pittsburgh, which we know now is a system that pretty much allows every running back to produce? Tags, what do you think the future holds for Bell?
It's concerning, and I talked about this on our podcast the other day, saying that Le'Veon Bell, if you're in like a best ball draft right now, because best ball drafts are open already, and if you're doing one, I wouldn't touch Le'Veon Bell at the start of drafts. Like, people are drafting him at the end of the first round right now, and I wouldn't touch him in the first 2 rounds. Third, probably I would, but you know that you're taking risk, because he has said that he will retire if he doesn't get the money he wants. And I know there's some people out there that are like, no way he'd retire. Everybody said the same thing about him walking away from the money he was supposed to make this year. I mean, like, what would he have made this year? 16 million? It's kind of ridiculous that he walked away from that. So I'm not putting out of the question that he doesn't play for any team in 2019 and that he's done in the NFL. I was looking earlier at teams that need running backs, and honestly, like, the only teams that I could see, like, with a clear-cut need, you need to bring this guy in because you can compete, he can make the difference. Philadelphia, but they're more of a committee, like under Doug Peterson. They've never, I mean, there's been like 2 running backs under his 3 years there that have topped 40 snaps, and it was Darren Sproles, 2 of them, and then it was I think Josh Adams did it once this year. It was kind of ridiculous. So, and then the Raiders are the only other team, because they're going to be missing Marshawn Lynch and Doug Martin after free agency. So I don't see any team paying up for that. Like, if you're willing to take a pay cut, I could see him, like, other teams taking a shot on him, like someone like Baltimore, like someone like Indianapolis, I guess. But again, paying a running back that kind of money in today's NFL makes absolutely 0 sense. You're seeing what C.J. Anderson is doing while Todd Gurley was paid a handsome contract. I'm not one of those people that says running backs don't matter. I think they do matter, but they don't matter $15 million matter a year. So for me, I don't expect the type of production out of Le'Veon Bell that you got in Pittsburgh, because he played behind a phenomenal offensive line that allowed him to be as patient as possible. So many people comment about Le'Veon Bell. He's such a patient runner, this and that. It's his offensive line that allowed him to be patient and wait for those holes to open up. If you were to put him behind, the Vikings offensive line this year, he would have averaged 2.5 yards per carry.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there will be a couple other teams that are looking for starting backs. I think the Bucks are one. I think we could see the Texans. I mean, they might get out of that Lamar Miller contract this year. Could see him getting released. He really hasn't performed for them at this point. I think they would be wise to go in a different direction. And I think those could be some landing spots maybe for the next couple guys I want to bring up here. Tevin Coleman and Mark Ingram. I think both guys could see their values go up depending on where they sign, and I think that might not be the most popular of opinions, so I'm curious what you guys have to say. But I talked about Coleman on the pod at one point this season. I really think he was a victim of the Falcons having a bad year this year. I mean, the defense was awful, really put them in some bad game scripts, and when you break down his numbers, what he did in the 7 wins they had versus what he did in the losses where Devonta Freeman was out of the lineup, he had a similar amount of touches, but had pretty much double the yards, double the touchdowns. So he had a lot more success when he was in those positive game scripts, and it wasn't just because he was getting more touches in those games. So I think that there is still a possibility we could see Coleman go somewhere. He doesn't need a 20 carry workload to make a difference. I think if he gets in the right offense, in a high scoring offense, we could see him produce for fantasy. And Ingram, I mean, we're talking about a guy there that he had over 250 touches, more than 1,300 yards from scrimmage, and at least 10 touchdowns in the 2016 season and the 2017 season before this year. Obviously, this year was suspended to start the season. Once he came back from suspension from week 5 on, he was the RB21. So, he's a guy that I think at this point, at 29 years old, I'm hoping that he wants to go to another team and be the guy, maybe get that one last big contract, big for a running back, but get that one last big contract, go somewhere where he can be the guy and not just sort of the sidekick to Kamara, which is what he's becoming. Really, most of his stats this season were coming when the Saints, were blowing teams out, and they just sort of leaned on Ingram there and saved Kamara for later. So I'm curious what you guys think about both of those players, because I feel like I've gotten a lot of blowback on Coleman especially before.
Go ahead, Woods.
I am not that excited about these two players. Now, can I imagine scenarios where they have very intriguing fantasy value? Yeah, I mean, let's just say Tevin Coleman ends up on the Texans, like you were just saying, and he's doesn't have a whole lot of competition there. Sure, like I'm certainly interested in him, and that's an increase in his value. But the more I try to think, like, where are these guys really going to end up? It's like they're going to end up in committees that I think it's more likely that they're going to hurt someone else's value than that they're going to like give a big boost to their value. I just worry, like one of them ends up in Indianapolis, and suddenly we're way less excited about Marlon Mack, and I'm also not very excited about Mark Ingram. So we were talking about Le'Veon Bell earlier. Like, did his holdout work? No. I mean, it didn't work. It gave us a very strong example that running back production has to do with far more than just the running back's talent level himself. Like, it has a lot to do with offensive line and scheme and everybody else around him. So teams aren't stupid. I know, like, we're in an era where teams just have so much salary cap space that you could give it to a running back if you want. Because, like, what's Mark Ingram going to get? Like, I don't know, $4 million a year or something like that. You could definitely afford to add Mark Ingram if you're most teams in the NFL and he's intriguing to you. But that also means teams with established running backs are in the market for Mark Ingram too. So I don't know that he's going to go out and get a starting job at his age. I think he's going to end up in some sort of committee where you're going to be like, yeah, I guess he's about the same value. Maybe he's slightly a little bit higher, but I can't. It's very hard for me to imagine the path to either of these guys being someone I'm all that interested in next year.
Well, for Ingram, from what we've seen, it does kind of seem like he's happy in New Orleans. Like, I could see a scenario where he does stay there. Tags, how you feel about Coleman and Ingram?
Yeah, I think it would be best for Ingram if he just stayed in New Orleans, to be honest, because I just don't. A lot of aging running backs, you just don't see him get big contracts at his age. I think he's 29 now, so he's towards the end, and he has had some touches on his body, even going back to college. So I'm not sure that I'd love Mark Ingram if he went anywhere else. The Saints have one of the best offensive lines in the game. Obviously, with Drew Brees there, that does help, as he was just talking about schemes in the team that you play for. So I'd like to see Mark Ingram stay put, personally. And if he goes somewhere else, we've seen John Gruden, get up these aging running backs and be fine with them. They're not a team that's competing. So I think that Mark Ingram should look to a team that's competing. I think Ingram would make sense to replace someone like Jordan Howard if the Bears were looking to move on from him, because he didn't look very good in the offense this year. As for Tevin Coleman, I just think that this year was a glimpse of what you would see if you trusted him with more of a bigger workload. I just don't think he's built to be that runner. He's more of like a boom bust style runner where he's going to break off some big plays, but you don't want him out there getting 20 carries per game. So he's someone that I would like to see in a timeshare, similar to an Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. I don't know where that is. I don't think it's going to end up in Atlanta because it seems like they're moving on. Ito Smith and Devonta Freeman are going to be fine. But I'm not really excited about either of those guys in free agency.
All right, how about the next two here? They're both guys that are probably going to miss time at the beginning of the season for very different reasons. The first is Kareem Hunt, and we don't need to go very far into his situation, but needless to say, a suspension's coming there, but some team is definitely going to take a chance on him. 23 years old, led the league in rushing as a rookie in 2017. The other is Jay Ajayi, and he's coming off that torn ACL in October. That could really put the start of his season in jeopardy. Tags, are you hopeful? Or are you expecting either of these guys to make a big fantasy impact maybe as the season goes on next year?
Yeah, I mean, if some team signs Kareem Hunt, they're going to put him on the field. It's kind of how I felt about Joe Mixon, where it's like if there's a team that's drafting him, he's going to be a workhorse. The only way to stop the talk about the negative stuff off the field is to put him on the field and make people forget about that. So if Kareem Hunt does find a team, and it's rumored that the Bears are interested because obviously he has ties going back to Matt Nagy when he was with Andy Reid and the Chiefs, it makes sense, especially when you consider the fact that Jordan Howard, he's just not a scheme fit, and he just doesn't look very good in the shotgun offense. So Kareem Hunt, if he signs with a team, absolutely, he's going to have fantasy value. He's going to be great. As for Jay Ajayi, I'm not really excited about. I don't know who's going to take a shot on an aging running back that already had bad knees to begin with, coming off an ACL injury. I was never a huge Jay Ajayi guy, and I have a feeling that the NFL, like when you saw the Dolphins give him away for, what was that? Was it a 4th or a 5th round pick? It kind of told you all you needed to know about how they felt about him and how the league kind of felt about him, because nobody was willing to pay more, obviously, than the Eagles did. So, yeah, I'm not really interested in Jay Ajayi, but Hunt, if someone does sign him, he's obviously going to miss those. I think it's at least 6 games, they said. So in the second half of the season, he would have some big value.
Yeah, I'm with Tags here. I mean, sometimes these guys with chronic knee issues, and remember, like Ajayi came out of college with chronic knee issues, they just kind of go away. Like, remember Noshawn Moreno? Like, he was a good fantasy player, and then he kind of just hurt his knee, and we never heard from him again. So it wouldn't stun me if Ajayi's just not signed in 2019. It wouldn't stun me if he's signed either and has a decent season, but he's not someone I'm like making a target. Now, Kareem Hunt, man, like that's a real real quandary, because I look at him and I'm like, I think this is going to be one of the best values in fantasy football in 2019, but you have to basically draft amorally. Like, you have to say, I'm okay having this guy on my roster. It's like, I look at it, I'm like, man, it's like, it might actually, if he gets like a 4-game, a 6-game suspension, you're like, this is going to be an incredible value on your roster, and you just have to wait through a month to get him in there. And yeah, if he's on like the Bears or something, so I mean, it's going to require some deep thinking if you want that player, if that's your style of fantasy and that's how you play the game. I mean, it's your team. You can put the players on your team, and you want to root for these guys. So, but if you strip away all the other stuff and you just look at like who out there has the chance to finish as, a top 5 running back who you can get in the mid rounds, I mean, he's probably top of your list.
For sure. There's also a lot of veterans, primarily veteran backups, who are going to have a chance to potentially make some noise here depending where they land. Guys like TJ Yeldon, CJ Anderson, Spencer Ware, Latavius Murray, Doug Martin. Tags, any favorites in that bunch?
I like Yeldon. I think he's been undervalued since he came into the league. Like, he was just put into a very bad situation, and it's still bad. People are looking at Leonard Fournette's yards per carry and wondering why it's not higher, myself included. A bad offensive line, yes, that's going to affect it, but continually, putting up sub 4 yards per carry, that's not going to do it. But TJ Yeldon offers a 3-down capability. He can play all 3 downs. If you need him to play a workhorse role, he can do that. But he's probably best suited for somewhat of a timeshare, like a Tevin Coleman type deal. So, like, if you look at a team like, I think the Bucs could be interesting with how much Bruce Arians used David Johnson in the passing game. Yeldon obviously can do that role. He can handle some work on 1st and 2nd down, and you don't have to use the equity in the draft. You mentioned the Bucs are a team that could be looking for a running back. They invested so much in Ronald Jones. I think they have to ride it out and at least see what they have. They never even gave it a chance in 2018 to see what Ronald Jones can do. And to be honest, nobody has done anything behind that offensive line. Doug Martin, you saw him literally be forgotten about. Like, he was benched, and then he goes to Oakland and he looks fine. So it's like, I think a lot of it had to do with Dirk Cutter's scheme. He looked terrible in it. You saw Devonta Freeman become a different running back when he was out of Dirk Cutter's scheme. So it's just like, you have to look at all this stuff and think coaching matters. All this stuff matters. So it's like, okay, is there value to be had in the Tampa Bay backfield? I say yes. I think that Ronald Jones might actually be a steal in drafts in 2019, but they do need to add an insurance policy. And I think someone like TJ Yeldon would make a whole lot of sense.
And with Fournette sidelined for the majority of the first half of the season this year, Yeldon posted really good numbers. 10th most fantasy points amongst running backs in standard leagues, 8th most in PPR formats. And if you took his stats and extrapolated them over the whole season there, you're looking at 240 touches, over 1,300 yards from scrimmage, 12 touchdowns. Like, it doesn't seem like that goes with TJ Yeldon, but if he ends up in the right situation, we could see that happen.
This is going to be boring for me to say, but for me, it's Yeldon too on this list. That's by far the most interesting to me. And I just go back to my personal evaluation of him coming out of college. I really liked Yeldon, the prospect, and we haven't seen it. That's been disappointing, but I give guys like that a second chance, at least, in my mind. I want him to produce, and it's not impossible that he's going to get to a scenario where you can see a path to some carries for him. Maybe he's the complement guy, but he has a 2019 skill set. All 3 downs, he's a good receiver. If he gets on the right team with a starter who's a little shaky, maybe a little injury prone, it's going to be hard for me not to sort of stash away TJ Yeldon as a late pick in drafts.
Mm-hmm. All right, so three cheers for Yeldon. How about the old guys here? I mean, are we going to see Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch, or Darren Sproles give it another go here? And if they do, Tags, is it even going to matter for fantasy?
I mean, not for me. I know AP looked good for the most part, and he played behind probably one of the best offensive lines he had ever played behind until they suffered all those injuries. They had 3 offensive linemen go down. I think it was around week 10, week 11, and you saw Peterson's production decline with it. So it's like the offensive line helped. I just can't see another team giving him a contract without an injury. I'm sure we're going to have an injury next preseason, and then, the talk will be, is someone going to sign Peterson? But at some point, him, Frank Gore, I think these guys are going to hang him up. And as for Marshawn Lynch, I'm pretty sure it's confirmed he's done. Like, he's not leaving Oakland. He came back just to go to Oakland. So I think that it's either Oakland or bust for him. So in Sproles, again, I think it was his last go around. I don't have any interest in these guys.
All right, how about at receiver? It's a pretty thin crop when you're looking for top end talent. There's a couple guys though that I like. I mean, Golden Tate isn't a number 1 option. Definitely struggled when he first got to Philadelphia after that trade, but he's a dependable slot guy, could make a difference on the right team. The next level of receivers, though, those are the guys that I'm looking at. John Brown, Devin Funchess, Tyrell Williams. I don't want to spoil the article that I have going up on Thursday where I talk about that group, but I think these are really names to monitor in free agency here. I mean, Brown's value took a massive hit, obviously, when Lamar Jackson got the starting job. After the first 7 weeks of the season, it's easy to forget this, but after the first 7 weeks, Brown was the wide receiver 11 in standard leagues, the wide receiver 16 in PPR formats. And I'm looking at it thinking if we see him join forces with a good quarterback, there's huge potential here, right? We could see him post wide receiver 2 numbers, I think. I don't think that's out of the question for Brown now that he's over the health issues, or at least it seems to be over the health issues. Funchess and Williams, they've also stepped up at different times on their teams, and they're young, right? Funchess 25, or going to be 25 this year. Williams going to be 27. So I'll give you both a chance to jump in here, but Tags, are you eyeing anyone from that group?
John Brown.
You've always liked John Brown, right?
Yeah, he's been my guy, and it's like, it was just painful to sit here and watch him like go through these health issues and derail a career that could have been much better. John Brown kind of showed, and the reason that I like him so much, and I think that he's going to latch on with a team, maybe a contender, maybe you're someone, maybe like the Packers, like maybe they're tired of sending those young guys out there. At least they get someone who's a little more experienced, can help develop opposite, Devontae Adams, and put Valdez-Scantling in the slot. You could do that. John Brown showed at the beginning of the year he still got it. And the fact that he stayed healthy all year is going to convince teams, okay, maybe he's over this whole sickle cell thing and we could take a chance on him. It might be a 1 or 2 year deal, but he can still play at the NFL level and contribute at a high level. Like, he had some massive games, as you mentioned. And then Lamar Jackson, they were just not on the same page at all. I watched a lot of those games, like the entire game, and I'm just sitting there watching, like, those two had nothing. Like Crabtree, honestly, none of the receivers did. Lamar Jackson he doesn't have very much accuracy right now, and he can't hit the ball downfield. So John Brown was kind of useless with him, but I do believe that he'll go to a team. I'm excited to see where he goes. Funchess, interesting, but I don't think that he's going to be as fantasy relevant as he ever was in Carolina, because, he was seeing over 100 targets. I don't think he finds that again. And Tyrell Williams is just a guy to me. I believe he was Phillip Rivers made. He had production because there were injuries in front of him. The volume was there. He's not someone that I mean, if you have him in Dynasty, his situation is not going to get any better. So, I'd be selling off for whatever I can get.
I see Funchess and Tyrell Williams as sort of, secondary pieces. They could be the number 2 receiver on a team, where John Brown, I think he could lead a team in receiving. I think
you're
it's possible.
crazy. You're crazy. This is a terrible crop of free agent receivers. I look down this list, I'm just like, oh no, I'm not interested in any of these guys really. Like, you can talk yourself into some of the, like, if they get into a perfect scenario. Yeah, sure, John Brown to the Packers. Yeah, I guess John Brown has value. Golden Tate, I don't know, goes to the Colts or something like that. Like, sure, he'll have fantasy value, but I think they'll get elevated to the point where I'm still not interested in them, because none of these guys are guys who are interested in even at their peaks, basically. John Brown had some good times, but it's not the kind of receiver I typically draft. And I know there's like a long history of free agent receivers sort of taking a while to adjust to their new team. And we talk about this when one gets traded, but even signings don't always work out. Like, the hit rate for free agent receivers, I haven't done a study, but I would be stunned if it's not like lower than other positions. It has, the chemistry has to be there, and it doesn't always emerge. So I generally shy away from free agent receivers in fantasy, just as sort of a rule.
Well, I was going to ask you, Woods, because I know you tend to value, I think, slot guys a little more than me. Some of those guys that I consider kind of boring, like some of the guys that are going to be free agents here, Jamison Crowder, Randall Cobb, Adam Humphries, they're all going to be looking for new homes. I find those options to be boring based on what you're saying. I'm guessing that you do too, Woods.
Oh yeah, I'm very bored by those guys. I don't even want to talk about them.
All right, good. Let's move on to the tight ends. It's really a one-man free agent class, I think, at tight end this year, and that's Jared Cook. Maybe you guys will disagree, but he's coming off a career year, but he's 32, and he has a history of disappointing fantasy owners. So it's going to be hard to trust him wherever he ends up. All I keep seeing for this one is just Gronk retiring and then Cook signing with the Patriots, which I hope doesn't happen, but fantasy-wise probably would be pretty decent for him. Tags, do you think we can actually see Cook keep up what he did this year?
No, Cook wouldn't last with the Patriots, though. He can't block. But from what I hear, the Raiders are expected to sign him to an extension, like to get him under contract before free agency. That Gruden is pretty set on getting him re-signed, which kind of makes sense just because he's got familiarity. He's been in the system for a year. He's like one of the only guys that Carr seems to have chemistry with. So it's like they have so many other positions of need that they have to address in the draft that I think Cook's going to end up re-signing with them. It just kind of makes sense for him coming off a career year too. There's really nobody exciting here. I think that if a team is missing a tight end, it's best to attack it through the draft this year. It's a semi-deep tight end class. Like there's probably 3 tight ends who are being talked about as potential first-round picks. So I'm not excited about any of these tight ends, including Jared Cook. Like I wouldn't want my favorite team to get Jared Cook. I feel like it's an opportunity-driven position for him, and we've seen enough disappointing seasons from him over and over for me to know this is mostly what you're going to get. You're going to get glimpses of a crazy athlete, but outside of that, he's just been very mediocre.
And be careful of the name value, too, on a guy like, Tyler Eifert out there as a free agent. I just don't think at this point that we're going to see him stay healthy long enough to be able to make his mark in fantasy at all. So
I think he's done in the NFL. Like last year, he was a free agent, too. People forget that. He was a free agent and was out there forever. Okay, and like he had to settle for another 1-year contract with the Bengals, a team that knew him. Now they're under a new coaching staff, well, going to be soon, and there's nobody is going to bring him back. So I highly doubt that we might not ever see Tyler Eifert play football again.
I think if we got a report that Tyler Eifert's finally getting healthy, which is not impossible. I agree, he's probably just always going to be hurt. But if somehow it emerged, he's been really banged up for these last few years, but he's finally feeling better, I think I could talk myself into Tyler Eifert.
Now who's crazy? Come on.
He had 15 touchdowns one season or something. We know he was good when he was healthy, the very brief time that he was healthy. And again, I don't think it's going to happen, but I'll keep one eye out that just if there's, some team signs him and he's looking good at mini camps, is like, oh man, I could get back on with Tyler Eifert.
All right, so free agent kickers. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, we're not going to talk about that. Tags, as I said earlier, really appreciate you taking the time out, man, and coming back from vacation and jumping on with us today.
No, of course. Thanks for having me, guys. Look forward to talking throughout the offseason.
Make sure you're following Tags on Twitter at Mike Tagliere NFL and reading all his content over at FantasyPros. As I said earlier, this is sort of a season finale for us on the podcast. We're going to take a couple weeks off here after the Super Bowl, and then we're going to come back in February closer to the Combine, and free agency will be right around the corner, and then draft prepped after that. All exciting stuff. So we'll be here throughout the offseason, just not the next couple weeks. In the meantime, follow Woods on Twitter at David P. Woods. You can find me at Justin Boone. Make sure you're checking the NFL Fantasy News section on the Score app to see all my latest content every week. Big thanks to all our great guests this season, including Tags. A big thanks to Woods for riding shotgun with me, and to our producer, Taylor Rohali, and to Subway for sponsoring us all season long. A big thanks to the Roxwells for providing the music at the beginning and the end of the podcast. Love those guys. And the biggest thanks of all goes out to everybody who's listening. We're so appreciative of all the support we've gotten this year. It's really blown us away. I mean, that we started the pod in August and could just gain so much traction in year one. So thank you for that. And we won't be back next week, but I am already excited to get things started again in a couple weeks. We will see you then.
Said leave on time, my baby said leave on time.